Chapter 11, some of the details and strategies that come with both informative and persuasive speaking. Most textbooks usually separate these. There's several chapters on informative and persuasive, but as this is an introductory course, the book does a nice job of putting these things together. Some of the highlights that I want you to be aware of and hopefully use with both of these is this is the overview of what we're going to go over. In informative speaking, you need to be objective. And then there's two ways to do that, really, demonstration and explanation. And persuasive speaking, some of the things you need to do is understand that you're making claims, be aware of fallacies, and the Aristotelian proofs, which is what ethos is. I'll get there in a moment. All right, know the difference. All right, informative speaking, you're doing one of two things always. All right, you're committing to objectivity. So if it's somewhat of a controversial issue where there could be two sides, in informative speaking, you're simply describing what the event is or describing what the issue is. All right. Or B, so you're not presenting something as controversial. All right. How do plants grow? That's not a controversy. All right. It's simply something that happens. You aren't handing over perspectives. You're handing over basic information in an informative speech. All right. And so informing to explain, you simply usually use words, kind of thing. You don't really have visuals. We're going to get to that with the demo. But make sure you use narratives. Make sure you spell out with examples. Simply only spelling out the process drives your audience away. And so you can even spice it up, make it more interesting as you use narratives and as you use examples, right? Audiences are drawn into that. But you also have to explain the process, all right? And so let's say we're talking about factory lines in the auto industry. And so I'm going to bore you right now as I explain the process. First, the frame is put together. Then it moves along and the tires are put together. And then on top of the frame, they start to input the engine. After the engine's put in, they start working on the interior. Then the painting, then the electrical type of a thing. I might even describe that process wrong. But nonetheless, if your entire speech is this process after process, it's not going to be interesting at all. You need to pepper it in and throw in narratives and examples, even if they're very brief. All right, it brings the audience back. And then a demonstration speech. It's where you use objects. It's where you show things. And so when I teach public speaking, make sure students bring in a physical object. Sometimes it's as simple as they show us how to throw a football or how to swing a baseball bat. I've seen that before. Usually students, and why does this matter? You'll do demonstrations in your career probably. You'll show people things, particularly if you're any kind of field where you're having to communicate to an audience or to your employees repeatedly. So think about cooking shows. So in this assignment, I have had so much salsa and it's been delicious. A lot of homemade salsa where people bring their blender, they bring the ingredients, they chop them up in front of us, they blend it all together, then make everyone a small little plate of chips and salsa. So think of cooking shows. Cooking shows in and of themselves are a very, very large industry so the cooking channel, the food channel, the Food Network. And in the Food Network, that's what it is. It's a constant, ongoing demonstration of public speaking, of demonstrative speaking. All right, persuading. When you do a persuasive speech, and this is what you're going to do, we've looked at that assignment description. You're going to make claims. As you make claims, you're making statements from one perspective, whether it is your perspective or simply citing the perspective or backing up the perspective that you've chosen to adopt for this assignment. We need to understand that certain perspectives or claims that we make, they're always rebuttable or answerable from the other side. That doesn't mean the other side's accurate, doesn't mean that we're accurate, but it's something that just isn't necessarily easily resolved. Hence, it becomes controversial. Hence, it's a persuasive speech. For example, candidate A is the best choice for president. Most presidential elections in the United States, over the many, many, many decades, have been not 50-50, but some of them very close to 50-50. But either way, there's two sides of what it is. All right. Who is the best candidate? That's something that's never necessarily figured out. Understand that you're making claims, and so you want to draw upon evidence, you want to provide reasoning, and you want to get your audience to accept that perspective while still understanding there are other perspectives about that as well. Make sure you avoid fallacies, all right? The book does a good job of explaining several fallacies. Now, the first is a hasty generalization where you kind of blanket an entire, I guess we could say, group of people or a certain type of issue For example, say you've only met one person in your life. His name is Thomas. Thomas is super nice. So you conclude and you decide to present that everyone in England is nice. That may or may not be true, but your particular use of one experience suggests that that probably is a hasty generalization. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but it's flawed reasoning. The second is ad hominem, attacking a person instead of debating the actual issue itself. Let's say two people are debating global warming, and one person decides just to say, "Oh, you never worked in the oil industry. I worked in the oil industry, so I can see whether or not there's damage. You're just a fool." Uh, the person might be a fool, but nonetheless, it's an ad hominem attack. Actually, this is the second sentence here is called a red herring or a distraction. But nonetheless, it's name calling. You're a fool, where you separate yourself and the debate and your opponent to make it a much more personal thing rather than about the issue itself. All right. So fallacies are things we need to avoid. Introduce you to Aristotle just for a moment. Aristotle described in his book, The Rhetoric or Public Speaking or Persuasion, three artistic proofs. All right. There's three things that good persuaders do. First is they establish ethos, which is their credibility, their goodwill, showing that they're an expert, that kind of thing. Second is logos, or their use of logic, my capacity to spell out in increments. And third is the capacity to tap into an audience's emotion. And what's interesting is Aristotle said that ethos is more powerful than both logos, logic, or pathos, emotion, because credibility means everything. Whether or not, even if someone's really passionate, even if someone really, really makes sense, we determine whether or not we trust them, and therefore whether or not we will listen to them based on their ethos or their credibility that they have with us. So back to the presidential candidates, one person might be describing the person's history with policy, their education, their personal qualities and their character. For one group, for one audience, that ethos, that credibility is going to believe, but for another part, the other half of the audience are going to be like, no, those are lies. That what those are said, those things are said about that person don't matter. Thus, then your subsequent use of logic and pathos relating to emotion is only dependent on your capacity to establish ethos, either for yourself or for the person that you're advocating for. Those are some principles on informative and persuasive speaking.